Hi, this is Paul. As always, this is going to be something of an all over the place video. Many of you have heard about the Elon Musk BBC interview that some people are sort of talking about in terms of the Jordan Peterson Kathy Newman interview. I don't think that this video has the same kind of dramatic entertainment value as the Jordan Peterson Kathy Newman interview, but it is an interesting one nevertheless. Why is it interesting? Well, a lot of people think it's interesting because they have in their mind this implicit narrative of Elon Musk is going to sort of stand up to the man. Yesterday, I spoke with Jonathan Peugeot, Benjamin Boyce, and Local Distance. And one of the things we talked about is that part of what we have going on in our culture now is we have these narratives of rebellion that are hardly rebellious. Elon Musk, of course, is an extremely formidable individual who, one way or another, owns, controls, has founded numerous multi-billion-dollar organizations. He has an immense amount of fame, wealth, and power in the world. And he's talking to a reporter that most of us have never heard about, but that reporter, in a sense, represents the BBC, which is one of the oldest, most venerable information distributors that we have in the modern world. And so, in a sense, we have these proxies. I was quite surprised to find that Dr. John Campbell, who I watched especially at the beginning of the pandemic, who I very much enjoy watching him, in sort of the YouTube custom, I developed a sense of trust about him. He seemed to try as best he could, with the expertise that he had, walk through the information available early on in the pandemic and give some kind of reasoned guidance. And I remember when I started watching him, he had, I think he was probably in the low five-figure YouTube subscribers, and I see today 2.75 million. And he's had his own journey through questions of knowing and what to believe and how to believe it. I haven't followed him closely for the last couple of years. It does seem, however, that he has serious questions about the narratives. One of the things that John always struck me as was someone who did his best to sift through the information that he had accessible to him, to weigh it against the amount of experience and knowledge that he has accumulated over his life, and to try and share it as honestly as he could with his YouTube audience. If you go over his videos, you'll see that, in fact, in this video, he talks about the fact that
about a whole range of
about his own vaccine injury. Let's see if I can find the place that he talks about it.
Weren't expecting that.
Let's talk about something else.
Has the BBC changed its COVID misinformation? I'm talking about the BBC's misinformation about COVID. Questions there from Elon Musk. Now, let's look at some of the commentary that was been going on about this. This is from one of the leading, most respectable papers in the United Kingdom, actually, arguably the most authoritative paper in the United Kingdom.
Now, he says authoritative paper. My sermon this Sunday, which, if you listen to the rough drafts, will be out on Saturday, Lord willing, is about the end of the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus is on a mountain, and he says to his disciples, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me." Authority was very much a topic in my conversation with Benjamin and Wokel and John. This question of authority in the world, who to believe. I don't remember if it was on the recorded version of our conversation. Wokel, Benjamin, and I talked a little bit after. Jonathan had to go to attend to some family things. But you often wind up in this position, and Elon Musk does with the BBC reporter. Well, who do you believe? How to believe? Twitter is this platform of semi-self-selected voices, also selected via an algorithm, that presents to us a information that we're supposed to take in, and we take in this information and we sort of create for ourselves a picture of the world, all sorts of beliefs, impressions, biases, all of those things together. One of the really, I think, impressive and honest elements of John Vervaeke's work, and by the way, if you haven't seen the No thing compiled by Grim Grizz's Little Corner of the Corner, you should see it. I'd never noticed that John Vervaeke will sometimes say no, and off we go. Anyway, I've distracted myself. We try to put these things together, and what we have when we're looking at, maybe it's the beginning of the interview here.
COVID misinformation. You changed the COVID misinformation
Has
rules.
BBC changed its COVID misinformation?
The BBC does not set the rules on Twitter, so I'm asking you.
No, I'm talking about the BBC's misinformation about COVID.
I'm literally asking you about, you changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, it then disappeared. Why do that?
Well, COVID is no longer an issue. Does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding masking and side effects of vaccinations, and not reporting on that at all? And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
Now what's interesting here is, so who do we have sitting here, and what seats are they in, and what are their roles? Of course, Elon Musk has purchased Twitter, this platform, and he's sort of speaking for it. But what on earth is Twitter? It's this massive platform with many, many voices that are saying all sorts of things at all different times with all different reasons. Can we possibly say Twitter says X? Now, the BBC is a much more constructed organization. It's, if we think of Twitter and the BBC as bodies, the two different bodies are quite different. The BBC has within it they both have hierarchies, but the BBC in a sense can speak with one voice. Now, a little bit of sympathy for the reporter here, because this really isn't sort of apples to apples, because Elon Musk is speaking for Twitter, and he can do it in a sense with authority because he owns the company and has a tremendous amount of power with respect to how the company operates. Yet the thing itself is just this, I mean, is it legion? It's this multi-vocal thing where people are talking to each other. And of course, the question is, well, these COVID statements are, well, what does this mean? This gets into a lot of long-term conversation about legislation, for example, that the telephone company wasn't responsible for the things that people said when they used the telephone company. But then you had mass media where the television, the old airwave television stations, were responsible for the public interest. And of course, the BBC dealt with that differently. You can go back to the rest is history, and they talked about the development of radio and the BBC. And the United States and Britain took different policies. Britain very much had much more of a policy of organization and voice. So we would say BBC has an editorial voice. And even though there are many writers for the BBC has in itself a much more coherent agency than something like Twitter. But Twitter was, like YouTube, like many other things, was sort of forced to wade in with an editorial voice. It could very well be that after this video, by virtue of some of the topics that I'm playing and some of the videos that I'm playing, that YouTube will deem it necessarily to put a little COVID strip beneath this video. And so then you see the it's almost a hybrid animal that we have with YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or any of these social media platforms, that they're not like the BBC. And so whereas you're really not apples to apples in terms of who you're talking about, Elon's questions land more forcefully because BBC is the type of body that has a more unified, coherent spirit behind it that speaks. BBC has policy, editorial board, board of direct, all of these things that sort of govern the speech of BBC. And then so you have, this is almost like Pacific Rim, where you have one kind of giant robot or monster like the BBC that is talking to a different kind of robot or monster that is Twitter. And BBC wants to say, hey, you need to take responsibility for the way that your organism is forming the audience out there. Well, what does that mean? Well, that audience out there is this body politic or a consumer. It's this much larger body. And so in a sense, what we have are these two little smaller bodies, spiritual bodies within a larger body, arguing about, well, are you doing your due diligence? Are you doing your due diligence? And of course, someone like Dr. John is in the middle of this. I still want to find the vaccine injury statement that he made, because I found this interesting.
Full interviews there. Check it out. Surprisingly, it seems to be still available.
Excuse me. Dr. John recognizes an agency at work behind the BBC that might have a degree of reputational maintenance and preservation that it was to do. So, surprisingly, this interview is still up.
The BBC are still making this interview available. Mr. Musk again, does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding
and of course, this is Dr. John's style with the paper and the camera.
Masking and side effects of vaccinations, and not reporting on that at all. That's what Mr. Musk said. Now, I must say, watching the larger part of this interview, I'm very, very impressed about how well Mr. Musk is informed about a whole range of issues. Really quite impressive, and I think we can assume he's fairly well informed. I don't really know who that reporter was from the BBC, but I expect his boss has had a word with him for being perhaps not as prepared as he could be. More on that interview later on. And what about the fact, again, direct quotes, that the BBC was put under, seems to have information that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government. If so, that is rather ominous and would totally undermine, in my view, British democracy. So let's hope that's not true. What were the BBC put under pressure?
And again, Dr. John this is part of the reason I've really admired him, is very measured, and he's got these big signs behind him now. He used to have these other big signs about sort of the standard health thing, get vaccinated, wash your hands, wear a mask. I mean, Dr. John has sort of evolved through this whole thing. And so if you go back and look at the old videos and the new videos, you can sort of see the evolution of Dr. John in all of this.
Pressure to do, according to Mr. Musk, to change the editorial policy. Are you aware of that? Now, obviously, the BBC being presumably lily white and squeaky clean on this would come back and say, no, this is complete rubbish. But as far as the Telegraph article was concerned, the BBC declined to comment on Mr. Musk's claims.
And again, the BBC imagined to be a body with a degree of consciousness and agency.
Why? Why wouldn't they comment on Mr. Musk's claims? Why on earth not? Mr. Musk previously spoken about having major side effects after the second COVID vaccination. I became aware of my assumed adverse reaction to the vaccine after my third dose. Mr. Musk was aware of his after his second dose. And he says this left him feeling as if he was dying for several days. So I really hope he's made a full recovery.
And again, now, there's a degree to which, even someone being out in public talking about a very valid personal experience is considered on a platform in certain areas. Well, you're not supposed to share this kind of information.
If what I consider to be my vaccine injury, I haven't made a full recovery. I need to take blood pressure medications now, and that just started a few months after my third dose. Temporal correlation, of course, temporal correlation.
And again, Dr. John has always, to me, proven to be very honest. But it shows something of the end of the age of innocence that mass media had with us. And of course, that age of innocence was on the heels of the days before mass media, when our information came one to another. Of course, you had the printing press before that. But I think in many ways, people were living much more off of the sort of the combination of two worlds. Someone in the last interview in a comment said I should watch, what's that apologetics question with the guy who went to jail for assaulting his father with a hammer? You'll put it in the comment section. So I went to that, and he was, making some commentary on this Mark Zuckerberg, Lex Fridman conversation. And so I sort of hunted it down and listened to it myself, and liked the way that Mark Zuckerberg made this comment, very much upper and lower register.
Not just based on who you happen to be next to. I think that's what the internet is already doing, is allowing you to spend more of your time not physically proximate. I mean, I always think when you think about the metaverse, people ask this question about the real world. It's like, the virtual world versus the real world? And it's like, no, the real world is a combination of the virtual world and the physical world. But I think over time, as we get more technology, the physical world is becoming less of a percent of the real world. And I think that opens up a lot of opportunities for people, because you can work in different places. You can stay closer to people who are in different places. So I think that's good.
Removing barriers of geography and then barriers of language. That's a beautiful vision.
That's a beautiful vision. Is it? We're not all that sure it is. And then the BBC, obviously, with Elon Musk and Twitter, isn't sure that it is. It's everybody likes all of this. Everybody likes all of this lovely, flowery thought about limitlessness until you're actually living in limitlessness. And then suddenly you realize, no. They like diversity as long as diversity is exactly what they expect to find it, or all of the surprises are pleasant. And this is not the way it goes.
Big, ridiculous question.
And so what Zuckerberg says here, when he says the virtual world and the physical world, I don't think virtual is the best name for it. It is much more. It could be the storyverse, the spiritual world. We can say it that way. There's lots of different ways to say it. It's very difficult for us. The physical world is easier for us to sort of pin down, we think, but that is even receding in sort of a modernist frame.
Is it the BBC?
Previously banned for things like hate speech. Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
Well, who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Is it the BBC?
You're literally asking me?
Yes.
Well, no, you are the arbiter on Twitter, because you own Twitter.
Yes, I'm saying, who is to say that one person's misinformation is another person's information? The point of
and now this could devolve, obviously, into just sort of nihilism. None of us can know anything, and skepticism. But, of course, as a process question, is the owner of the platform responsible then to wade into any information that is being transmitted by it? Is there a burden of responsibility? And they go into that. They go into that further. Jordan Peterson, back when he was talking about ThinkSpot and developing a platform in which the only rules about speech would be with respect to what is legal in the United States, something along those lines. But to pull it back again, because the concern is one of formation, because we know that all of these bodies that are out there, whether they be Twitter, which is this multivocal hodgepodge assemblage of information going back and forth, and every single user who goes to Twitter, by virtue of who they follow and who the algorithm sends their way, every different person has a different experience of Twitter than any other different person. And of course, you have the question, Musk defends himself. He says, well, we took out bots, and so there's less information. Well, would bots have... Bots are usually sort of amplifiers for certain actors because, again, going back to Sam's conversation, bots don't care. Actors care. Bots are tools that are used by actors in order to amplify certain kinds of information. But again, we have these two images of two different beasts. One is the BBC and one is Twitter, and they're both nested within this larger body politic. And of course, there's body politic in the United States, body politic in the kingdom and in other countries. And this is what we're trying to conceptualize. And we're using narrative, we're using names, we're trying to manage in very rough terms, trying to think about all of this. We are deeply, again, Zuckerberg says, well, it's virtual. It's not really virtual. It's much more story. We're nested in narratives. And again, it's not simply narratives. It's a much different thing. Now, a little while ago, Nate said, oh, Paul, I didn't know if he said it to me directly or he said it on a channel or he said it on Twitter. I don't know how. I don't even know how Nate. I haven't met Nate Heil in person. I really believe Nate Heil is a skin-bound human being like I am, and not a construction of some AI genius who's decided to create Nate Heil and Grail Country. But he recommended this book to me, and I know a lot of you recommend books to me. And one person I suggested that, colonizing someone and getting me to read the book you want me to read, it's not a terribly straightforward thing. And in many respects, I've told the story before, part of the origin story of my channel is that I wanted Jordan Peterson to read C.S. Lewis's book Miracles. And I thought, well, I'll just send it to him. I'll figure out, I'll send it to University of Toronto. And this were early days, of course, before he left University of Toronto, and I'll just send him a copy. And then I thought for a moment, I said, that's a really dumb idea. How many books is that poor man getting? And then there was an event that he went to, a very early event that he went to San Francisco, the Simulation Conference. Some of you might remember that. Some of the people from our meetup went. And I thought about taking a copy of Miracles to give to him there, and I didn't. And then when I got to the venue, I noticed that a lot of people brought books to give to Jordan Peterson, and it's like, yeah, colonizing someone, colonizing their mind, their heart, their life, their channel, their influence, not an easy thing. It's a subtle thing. It has to be done. But anyway, you basically have to cultivate a relationship. And Nate Heil has recommended many books to me that I have not read. Some of them have even shown up in my office, and I've spoken about some of them. But he just had to say Tradition and Apocalypse by David Bentley Hart, and I went out and got it right away, partly simply because of the title, and was very glad I did. It begins right off the bat. It seems clear to me that the conception of tradition in the theological sense, however lucid and cogent it might appear to the eyes of faith, is incorrigibly obscure and incoherent. And we talked a little bit about tradition in my conversation with Benjamin and Wokel and Jonathan. And Jonathan quite rightly noted that, well, in church, especially the Orthodox Church, you have a tradition. Well, what is a tradition? Tradition is what I often call the first draft of how we begin to approach the world. Tradition is how we go about things. And in fact, without tradition, we do nothing. And when John Vervaeke says, no, I should just play that darn thing. It is so funny. I'm not going to get this out of my head until I play it.
No, not at all. No. Right? No. I mean, nobody sort of worries about the epistemic status of knowing. No, not that. No. Right? That's the way we're going to deal with this. No.
That's my favorite one. No. And all of this is in so much love. I mean, we like when they memed me with my this is Paul, and then all.
No. No, right? No, not at all. No. No. That's a mistake. No. That was excellent. No. Yes.
Or whatever. Like it's
No. It's just an.
Yes. No.
No. I don't know. I don't mean that. No. I didn't. No. No. Yeah. No. I think that's right. No.
No. Anyway, had to get that out of my system. Sorry. So even John Vervaeke's no. I mean, probably one of his parents did this, or someone formative in his life did this, or it's just emerged from him. And we're all, I remember as a growing up person, people would look at me and look at my father and say, he walks like him. He sounds like him. I mean, they'd call me Little Rev because I called my father Rev, so they called me Little Rev because I was a lot like him. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We all begin with some sort of tradition. But when you come to the church, well, some churches especially are all about the tradition. And if you pause and ask yourself, well, what exactly are we talking about here? And that's sort of what David Bentley Hart does here. The things begin to emerge. This, I would argue, is not true. It's true not only to the vague popular version of that concept that a good many believers harbor, but rarely think about. It is true also of the version of what many, perhaps most Christian theologians have tended to consciously to adopt since the publication in 1845 of the first edition of John Henry Newman's Essay on the Development of Christian Doctrine, which more or less set the agenda for discussion on this topic, and to which no alternative account for a very great significance has yet been proposed. To this day, in fact, the only Maurice Blondel's History of Dogma in 1904 has made anything like a substantial advance in theological reflection on the issues raised in the text, and then more a supplement than an alternative to Newman's argument. This is unsurprising, I suppose, inasmuch as tradition in this specifically theological acceptance is a very new idea, relatively considered, with no deep roots in the tradition of the church, but the general neglect of the topic leaves a fairly enormous, unresolved question in Christianity, though lying quite conspicuously and troublingly open. When we speak of Christian tradition, what are we really talking about? Can we really prove the existence of, and then in fact identity, a particular living, continuous, and internally coherent phenomena that corresponds to that phrase, and will, in any attempt to do so, evidence only a product of pure historical fortuity, consisting, this is the way David Bentley Hart writes. And he's a beautiful writer, but he's a dense writer and a thick writer. And but to summarize it, he says basically, well, we so blithely say tradition, and if we would stop to think about this thing, well, things very quickly get more complex. And he begins to, each first chapter is tradition and traditionalism, and he begins to sort of unpack this thing and talk about it. And so when you look at Twitter, which is a fairly new animal, a fairly new body, and it's like, we don't really have any idea what on earth is going on with something like Twitter. Do we really have something in history that corresponds to what we have like Twitter, whereas the BBC is an animal or a body or a monster that we're quite more accustomed to. I don't just want to raise this point about tradition. He has in this chapter, I thought, one of the most helpful little segments that sort of grabbed me in terms of a paragraph or two that gets at the sense of what it's like to be formed by a religion and to live within, and again, words escape us, the narrative of that religion, the worldview of that religion. Most of the language that we have doesn't really adequately, in my opinion, sort of get at what we're talking about. So right away in the sentence, I'm going to have to pull up the Kindle dictionary because I don't even know the word that he's using. Admittedly, the entire topic seems rather recherche, meaning exotic, rare, obscure. A few linguistic terms are perhaps a bit recherche for the average reader. So admittedly, I'm just going to substitute another word in there so that the sentence makes sense to those of us who are not as well educated or literate as David Bentley Hart. Admittedly, this entire topic might seem a bit obscure, exotic, rare from the vantage point of the ordinary believer. Few of the faithful ever find themselves obliged to delve down into the history of their creed. They have better things to do, and so are perfectly willing to accept the catechism they have received, and even that with as little attention as possible to any of its most prominent features. And when I read this, I thought, wow, yes, that's right. Because as a minister who is making these crazy YouTubes for all of you really esoteric people out there that have one way or another been sort of dislocated and dislodged from your structure of knowability and the community that you were raised in, you are set on a different course. Now, I've been diving into the J.K. Rowling podcast, and this is done by Megan Phelps-Roper. And so that led me into diving into her story a little bit. Now, of course, Westboro Baptist was famous for a while. And in her words in the podcast, it's sort of been overshadowed because in some ways the rest of the internet has caught up to it. And so, crazy little obscure church protesting military funerals because of American policies with respect to LGBTQ communities or individuals, whatever. But in the digging, I learned some things because I had this sort of low resolution, assumed, inherited, biased assumption about who these Westboro Baptists are. And when listening to this woman, I discovered, no, in fact, I knew nothing about them. They're in many ways quite a bit more interesting than I thought they were to begin with.
Hello, good evening. My name is Megan Phelps-Roper, and I grew up, born and raised in the Westboro Baptist Church in Topeka, Kansas. It's a congregation founded by my grandfather, Fred Phelps, and consisting almost entirely of my extended family.
Now that part I knew. I knew it was a very small church consisting of an extended family. And that should have been a tell, because most, again, the biased, propagandist assumptions that I inherited was that there's just this tiny little, Kansas, that I expected, tiny little, very orthodox, too tightly wound Baptist church that somewhere in another figured out that they could get a lot of publicity and do a lot of things just by going and making signs at military funerals and getting on the news and ticking a lot of people off. I was not prepared for the amount of education, the seriousness, the rationality, the clarity, the determined nature of their biblicism that launched them into this place. And because this woman here speaking at the Oxford Union is clearly a woman of considerable poise and intelligence.
My family is full of lawyers. They are incredibly intelligent and well-educated, loving, wonderful people.
Ah, well, in other words, she grew up in the bosom of these people, and with everything, let's say, accepting, making very effective signs, because actually, if you look at their signs were very effective, and you know that because if you drive down the street and you look at panhandlers, people who are in one way or another, I suppose, vying for their lives, their signs are dramatically ineffective. These people were very intelligent. They knew how to make signs, and apparently they were very loving, and they knew how to have wonderful intergenerational families. And they're, in fact, extremely reasonable and rational, because they'd say, here it is in the Bible. We are going to do this in this way to try and affect the world in a particular manner.
Who also believe that the Bible is the infallible Word of God, and that Westboro has the only correct interpretation of it.
The second part, infallible, she didn't say inerrant, and I'm sure very consciously so, and that Westboro has the only interpretation of it. Well, now that's interesting.
What that led them to do was in 1991, when I was 5 years old, was to start protesting at a local park in Topeka, Kansas. We started just holding signs just about the gay community, but pretty quickly everyone outside the church became a target for our message. Everyone outside was a sinner who fell short of the glory of God, and our job, our duty, the only way for us to show our love for our neighbor was to go out and warn them that they were all headed for hell, and to explain to them exactly all the ways that they were sinners. And that, for us, as I said, the definition of love is how it was framed for me. There's a passage.
Now, again, this is very effective, very reasonable.
In the book of Leviticus, the first time "love thy neighbor" appears in the Bible, and it says, "Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart, but thou shalt in any wise rebuke him, and not suffer his sin upon him. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." So for us, that was a very clear indication that the way that you showed love for other people was to explain to them why they were going to hell.
And again, it makes perfect sense. Penn Jillette basically made the exact same argument. You can find that video on YouTube as well.
That they would have an opportunity to repent if God would give them that gift. So that was one huge part of my life. My life and my family's lives were all organized around this picketing ministry, going out and standing on public sidewalks with picket signs. But then there was also this, the very, loving home environment. I am the third of 11 children. We played video games and read books and watched movies.
In other words, they weren't sort of the stereotype of the completely enveloped. These were very impressive people, it sounds like.
And went to public school. Some people look at the fact that we went to public school and went to college and were educated and wonder how it's possible to believe in the things that we believed in the 21st century, even in spite of being exposed to every influence outside of those beliefs that we were indoctrinated with from the time we were children. And the only answer that I have is that it's like being inoculated against outside ideas.
Okay, so that was the world in which their rough draft was created. Also found this very interesting interview on a channel called Jewish News Weekly with 33 subscribers, and the interview is 13 years old and has 186,000 views. Just to show you that subscriber count and view count don't necessarily correlate. And this is the same woman on the street with the signs 13 years ago. And again, you have all of the biases and propagandist infiltrations that You know, this woman would have never seen a dentist, and she would have been homeschooled, and all of these things, and it's simply not true.
How long have you been a member of this church?
I was 5 years old when we started picketing, and I'm going to be 24 on Sunday.
You got involved because of your parents?
Say it again?
How did you get involved? Your parents?
Yeah, I've been attending Westboro Baptist Church since I was born.
Okay.
Just like all the rest of my siblings. There's 11 kids. My parents have 11 kids.
And where are you in the birth order?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Where are you in the birth order?
I'm third. I'm the oldest girl.
And when you were 5 years old, were you holding signs?
Yeah. And I said, when I turn 6, I'm going to go to every single picket. But I couldn't go. And so when you're 5, it's really simple. You learn as you go. You learn these words, you read the words.
And so, again, perfectly lovely person standing up holding these signs. Back to David Bentley Hart. Few of the faithful ever find themselves obliged to delve into the history of their creed. Now, she probably had done so more than most, led by her grandfather and her family that were that little church. They have better things to do, and so are perfectly willing to accept the catechism as it was received, and even that with as little attention as possible to any of its most prominent features. Neither, by the same token, are most believers traditionalists, since that too would require a sort of concern for detail that is irrelevant to their faith. I think that's really helpful because what he did was sort of distinguish tradition as such from this first draftness that we have, and that first draftness sort of inhabits a part of it, and I think it molds and shapes our world and our perspective of the world. And as a child, one way or another, your parents probably, you sort of absorb the first draft that you receive from your parents. Most believers more inhabit their religion than reflectively assent to it. I thought his language is really good here. They more inhabit their religion than reflectively assent to it. And I think that gets at the quest for the spiritual home idea, as we talked about with John and Jonathan earlier this week. I should highlight that because I will probably want to find it later, at least in the way that one might assent to a simple proposition. In other words, yes, and we talk a lot about propositional belief and assent, and people, it's just part of it. This is just the way things are. In some very real and not at all dishonorable sense, their belief rests upon the experience of belief only. I thought that was really insightful too. Thus, in a way that would be altogether scandalous to the average traditionalist or integralist, fascist, or religious scold, such believers, we could say that Westboro Baptist was a pretty extreme example of religious scold. Such believers are largely indifferent to a great many of the dogmatic, oh, David, the way you write, pertinence, an accessory or other item associated with a particular activity or style of living. Dogmatic appurtenances of their faith. Most doctrines are not things they believe discreetly, but are instead things that they accept only as nebulously included within the totality of the faith as a whole. Yes, I think that's right. Few, for instance, truly believe anything so degrading, obscene, cruel, psychotic, and in fact unscriptural as the notion of the reality of a hell of eternal torment. Again, this is David Bentley Hart's take on this, of course. But he does have a point, because if you ask people about hell, many Christians will say yes. But they don't act like Westboro Baptist. Now, you could challenge Westboro Baptist not just on, let's say, their doctrine, but very much on their practice. And you could say, if in fact your motivation is genuinely love, do you really think that this sign ministry will actually accomplish what it is you want to accomplish? Now, what's interesting is that if you continue with Megan...
The world needed my grandfather.
If you continue with her story, you find that, well, she goes on Twitter and she gets on Twitter to debate these things. And what if you're wrong? And basically, Team Winsome wins the day with her. She begins to discover that, she begins doing this uncovering that David Bentley Hart is going to talk about. So they don't believe in hell, at least not with any immediacy of conscious awareness, much less with an imaginative consideration of what so foully. I wish he hadn't used this example, because the example itself is, you can use a much less triggering example here to make the point, I think, better, because once in the very sentence that you want to look at the dynamic, you actually provoke the response that you're going to talk about a little bit later. You kind of undo your point that you make in the sentence. To do so would be to invite psychosis, or to accomplish the total destruction of one's own moral intelligence. Okay, David, we'll set that aside. Most, however, vaguely accept the idea of an indistinct, unreflexive, almost symbolic form as little more than something remote and shadowy on the far horizon, hazily and hyperbolically defining the outer edges of their spiritual Sitz-in-Leben, that setting in life. And if you've gone to seminary and you read theological books and commentaries, you learn all about Sitz-in-Leben. For the large majority of believers, the larger inventory of doctrines is little more than a background stage scenery that allows them to play out the drama of religious life in some kind of coherent setting, rather than set off starkly or vestigiously against an existential void. And this suffices for a life of faith, so long as one does not get bored and begin inspecting the stage too closely. Okay, what is he saying with that? For the large majority of believers, the average inventory of doctrines is more like is little more than backstage scenery that allows them to play out the drama of religious life. And so she grows up in this church, and you've got the protests, and you've got the dogmas, and it's all sort of there, and it sort of sits nicely until something's going to provoke a shaking of it, and then maybe you're going to have to start to examine some of these things more closely. And of course, David Bentley Hart wants you to examine your belief in hell as eternal conscious torment or something of the like. And this suffices for a life of faith, so long as one does not get bored and begin inspecting the stage too closely. If one does that, all the scenery, the trees, the distant hills, the quaint villages nestled into the fold of the valley, the white steeple in its humble church, and so forth, will be revealed as just so much purely functional, crudely daubed pasteboard. I think he's pushing his point a little hard, but the point is this. You will begin to discover that your faith is functional, perhaps not tested, but also not a bad thing or thing to be maligned. And if in fact you begin to examine some things, you will find that as resolution goes up, complexity goes up, and you're going to have to do quite a bit more work to maintain what for you was a sort of benignly accepted vision beforehand. And this, in fact, is when we talk about autodidacts in the faith, this is partly what goes on. Now, hopefully, your church or tradition or people will be able to assist you because, of course, many have gone there before. And you can read, let's say, C.S. Lewis's A Pilgrim's Regress. There's a lot of this in A Pilgrim's Regress. At that point, one will no longer be able to proceed with perfect innocence, and it will become necessary to make an explicit decision along three possible options. 1, to commit oneself to forcing each feature of the background. In other words, now I've got to go through and really weigh these things and in our language, come to my own conclusions and assent because of them. And many people in fact, do that. Tree, hill, village, steeple, and so forth into the foreground, hoping to prove that all of this is, in fact, really what it purports to be. 2, to resign oneself to a faith purged of the comforting illusion of cozily close horizons and familiar landmarks. There's sort of, so the first one is something of a quest. The second one is something of a perspectival shift. Third, to forsake belief altogether. And of course, people do that. Now, I would want to jump in with a point that Tim Keller often makes, which is so often when these subtraction stories are told, we imagine that forsaking beliefs is sort of leaving, let's say, an overly furnished room and leaving a house, let's say, and now you're out into bright skies and blue skies, and now you see the world as it is. That's sort of the rationalist, new atheist subtraction story. And I think actually Keller is quite right in making the point that, no, actually you're just going into a different room. Because usually what happens, and I think this is, I haven't really investigated her story enough, she basically, I would imagine to one degree or another, joins a much more mainstream and then will in some ways sort of then once again settle down to what he describes: the trees, the distant hills, the quaint village nestled in the fold of the valley, the white steeple and its humble church, because he could only live at a certain resolution. And in fact, the world, as we continue to make the point, is too complex for us to actually go all the way at any one point or another. And instead, what we have are individuals that will only go so far and no more to one point or another. If only it were possible for everyone to enjoy the blissful naivete of incurious belief, without it denigrating into fundamentalism or morbid formalism or some other impediment to healthy moral and intellectual growth, then perhaps the incensed anxiety that produces traditionalism and the tragic disappointment that destroys faith could both be avoided. But as Newman understood, an unsustainable fiction sooner or later, by definition, loses its power to persuade. And so he set out to prevent disestablishment by trying to demonstrate that, however indistinct, impressionistic, and unprepossessing that stage background may often seem, there is a depth of reality behind it that it symbolically expresses. One may turn a critical eye to those crudely rendered images without surrendering to disillusionment if one is at the same time willing to look through them to the living truth they represent. He may well have been right, but in making his argument, he trained his gaze on only one horizon of that landscape, and that the receding horizon of the past. As a result, all he truly succeeded in demonstrating was that, again, it is impossible to defend the legitimacy of Christian tradition simply by recourse to the historical record, as though it were clearly the record of an inexorably unfolding deposit of belief already wholly contained in the most primordial moments of Christian revelation. Historical scholarship by itself provides no evidence of such a thing, or of any discernible rational unity within the course of Christian tradition that one could confidently claim has been sustained intact amid the flux of time and cultures, and the record has only grown clearer since Newman's time. And then he's going to talk about the relationship between tradition and history. History in the modern sense and tradition, and he's going to go into that. And now all of this long discourse is to hopefully illustrate that, whether it's as David Bentley Hart calls it, the tree, the hill, the village, the steeple, and so forth. This world as we see it, which we absolutely must have, in order to continue to process the world, because much of the world has to sort of hold still. That's sort of the point of the frame problem. In order to process bit by bit by bit, well, now we have to process COVID. Now we have to process Westboro Baptist Church. Now we have to process transgenderism and J.K. Rowling. Now we have to process Jonathan Peugeot and his symbolic world. Now we have to process the religion that's not a religion in John Vervaeke. Now we have to process Jordan Peterson. You have to leave a number of things sort of stayed, but all of these things are in fact deeply connected to one another. And so often what provokes a transformation and a pursuit of higher definition with respect to the tree or the hill or the steeple or the village, in fact, because all of this stuff is indeed connected. And part of the quandary that we find ourselves in is that these set pieces, or at least there has to be a certain degree of settledness for most of the picture for us to be able to process the individual elements of the picture that are connected to the whole. And whereas it would be awfully convenient, in a sense, if the BBC were the tree and the steeple and the town and all of those things, then you can simply, well, that's the static element that you can sort of keep in place in order to process all of the change going about you in the world. Whereas, obviously, for someone like Dr. John Campbell, for someone like Elon Musk, well, that monster has fallen. And what we have turned to now is something, we have gone sort of from a BBC monarchy to a Twitter parliament, where there's all of these voices. Now, of course, Twitter has an unbelievably large and complex parliament, such that if it were not for the limitedness that any single account and the algorithm that in some ways tries to guide you through it, it would simply be unworkable. Now, lest you think I have lost my interest in the Roman Catholic Church or the papacy, because again, for me, the papacy is in some ways a window into this entire dynamic, as opposed to, let's say, the Christian Reformed Church with its synod, and Protestant churches that have we don't have a pope, let's say. And this in some ways is mirrored by the American system that has House and Senate and President, or a parliament system, and even a constitutional monarchy where the King of England stays out of politics, probably in the way that his mother did. I'm continuing to go through Vatican I, and now I'm following John W. O'Malley's What Happened at Vatican II. And O'Malley is, I didn't know who O'Malley was, but O'Malley is a very accomplished scholar, president of Georgetown. A big deal. And so he writes about Vatican I and he writes about Vatican II. And one of the things that you immediately notice, let's say if you look at Vatican I, which happens in the middle of the 19th century, and in fact, David Bentley Hart talks about O'Malley and this book, in fact, in terms of the big 19th century for the Roman Catholic Church. And then you look at Vatican II. The council met in 4 distinct periods in the fall of every year from 1962 to 1965. Each of these periods, which lasted roughly 10 weeks. So you have 4 successive years, 10-week sessions. The first met under the pontificate of Pope John XIII, and the last the last 3 under his successors, Paul VI. I think Paul I have vague memories of the Pope of popes before John Paul II. Almost important as the actual meetings of some 2,200 bishops in the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome during these periods was the work done before the council. 2,200 bishops. This was a massive, massive meeting. I look at this meeting that Peterson wants to put together in London on Reformation Day in 2023, and 2,200 bishops, but the 2,200 bishops are only the start. And the things that they have to deal with are just so massive. The more immediate context is modernity, or more concretely, the long 19th century for which the Catholic Church stretched from the French Republic until the end of the pontificate of Pius XII in 1958. The French Revolution and the philosophy that undergirded it traumatized Catholic officialdom through much of that long century. The council was an attempt to, if you read Vatican I, Vatican I sort of is this, Europe is just coming unglued and radically changing fast, and the church is trying to preserve its sort of monarchical way of going about things. And what it does with ultramontanism, it sort of doubles down on monarchy and gives the Pope primacy and supremacy, and from someone who sort of was able to take the doctrine and dogma of the church and speak it into someone whose job was to form it and give it back to the church. So you have a difference in flow. And Roman Catholics out there who know way more about this than I do, which is probably any Roman Catholic out there, please accept my humble forgiveness for the ways that I am getting this stuff wrong. The council was an attempt to heal certain aspects of the church's history in that period and at slipping out of its vestigial weight. Vatican II was heir, however, to other aspects of the long 19th century, such as the development of biblical, liturgical, patristic, and philosophical scholarship, the competition with the Protestants in foreign missions, and the rise of socialism and communism. In the 19th century, they're wrestling with just the end of monarchy, and now they have to deal with how many different kinds of non-monarchy are out there in the world, and what are they going to say to it? And this is coming at the end of the Second World War, where the world was saved from fascism, and later through the Cold War, with the help of the Roman Catholic Church and John Paul II, from communism, and very much those deaths were dealt by what, in a sense, were the kinds of political systems that arose thanks to the Protestant Reformation. For the inner workings of the church, no aspect of the 19th century was more important than the new prominence of the papacy in every area of Catholic life. Of all the previous councils, therefore, perhaps none even more directly into the debates of Vatican II than Vatican I, 1869 to 1870, because of its definition of papal primacy and infallibility. The third and most specific context is the period belonging to the Second World War and continuing up to the opening of the council. Although this context overlaps with the long 19th century, when viewed with an ecclesiastical lens, when viewed through a political and cultural lens, it marks such a significant changes worldwide that it needs to be considered as a distinctive period. This is the era of the Cold War, which reached a perilous intensity in the Cuban Missile Crisis just a few days after the council opened. For almost 2 weeks, the world held its breath as the threat of nuclear annihilation seemed about to be realized. And there they are in the Vatican in Rome, talking about other things. This period saw the end of colonialism, which had a great impact on the missionary enterprises of all churches. It was the time when Christian democracy emerged in countries recently under fascist dictatorships, and it was the time when the Western world finally had to face the horror and implications of the Holocaust. These and other factors led politicians and churchmen to believe that a new age was dawning that needed new solutions and approaches. Now, a lot of that new age and new solutions and approaches are under continued challenge by more traditional elements of the church. All the issues the council addressed must, of course, be taken seriously. Nonetheless, there are some more significant areas than others. The best place to begin is the topic dealt with in the 16 final documents of the council. They indicate 16 areas of special concern: liturgy, education, ecumenism, and the rest. That is obviously, but nonetheless important to keep in mind. As I suggest, however, during and after the council, nobody thought that Vatican II said about the media compared to importance with what is said about church-state relationships or church's relationship to Muslim and Jews. The relationship of tradition to Scripture also emerged early on as a hot issue, and it continued to be such through the council. Underneath the contention on this seemed technical theological question lurked questions of wider significance. First, the prescription of value of earlier doctrinal statements, in this instance, the decree of the Council of Trent on the subject, and second, the way the teaching authority of the Church relates to Scripture. Closely associated with Scripture tradition questions, moreover, was the question of how far modern methods of literary and historical interpretation were legitimate as applies to the Bible. And what you see now is just in terms of the scale and size, the church now at this point hadn't just sort of colonized Latin America and Africa and Asia, but now those bishops from the rest of the world are coming to Rome as full bishops waiting to be heard, and this continues today. They have their own perspectives, and how do you manage this with a tradition that is just as large and weighty as that one? The quantity of documentation reflected the immensity of almost every other aspect of the council. In July 15, 1962, the Vatican Secretariat of State set out among 2,800 invitations to persons with a right to participate fully in the deliberation of the council. I believe I was reading in the Ivan Illich book that he was invited but did not attend. 85 cardinals, 8 patriarchs, 533 archbishops, 2,131 bishops, 26 abbots, and 68 superiors general of religious orders of men. All but a few hundred, impeded by ill health or their government's refusal to let them attend, showed up to the opening of the council. After the opening days, the numbers of persons present in the basilica varied considerably, but generally, when there were about 2,400 council fathers participating at any given time, 2,400 in a meeting. The Christian Reformed Church has a synod of almost 200, and that often seems unwieldy. A total of 2,860 attended part or all of the 4 periods. This is the contrast to other events. 750 bishops participated in Vatican I. So a century later, the number goes from 750, which is large indeed, all the way up to 2,800. The Council of Trent, as well, the least well-attended of all councils, opened up with just 29 bishops. I've sat in council meetings of 24 elders, and that was too much. Even later, at this largest session, the number of voting members at Trent barely exceeded 200. The bishops who attended Vatican II came from 116 different countries with more or less the following geographic distribution: 36% from Europe, 34% from the Americas, 20% from Asia and Oceania, and 10% from Africa. The communist governments of China, North Korea, and North Vietnam prohibited entire episcopates from attending. The European governments behind the Iron Curtain also made a participation difficult or impossible, with about 7% of the world's Catholics. North America somewhat overrepresented in that it provided more than 12% of the bishops. The meetings were held in the central nave of St. Peter's Basilica. Despite the huge proportions of that space, 2,500 square meters, it was barely sufficient to hold all the attendees. The nave was outfitted to provide almost 3,000 spaces, 102 for cardinals, 7 for patriarchs, 26 for the general secretariat of the council, 2,440 for the bishops and archbishops, 200 for the paritae, and 130 for observers and guests from other churches. The observers and guests sat in a tribune reserved specifically for them right under the statue of Saint Longinus, nearer to the president's table than even the cardinals, the best seats in the house. 2 catered stations or coffee bars, no alcoholic beverage, were set up in the basilica, and lavatories were installed in both sides, both inside and outside St. Peter's. This massive thing. And so now, again, to come all the way back to where we began, we're dealing with trying to figure out how to organize ourselves, how to organize the bodies that are forming us, and how to, in fact, know almost anything in this world through these bodies. It's amazing we know anything at all, except for the fact that we have to rely on the first drafts, updated bit by bit, moment by moment, person by person. That's the only way it seems we can live. And these moments of transformation when, for some mysterious reason, things sort of move in other directions. Now, as a Calvinist, you can just sort of put that all under the Holy Spirit, the God of creation that works through time and in time. But when you see whatever it is that Twitter is, and again, Twitter as a social media platform is relatively small. Here, let's ask AI. Facebook, 2.9 billion. YouTube, 2.2 billion. Instagram, 2 billion. LinkedIn, 883 million. Twitter, 217 million. All of this fuss over Twitter. Well, why? Well, it's because all of the BBC people and all of the politicians and all of those types, they're paying attention and participating in Twitter. And so what we're seeing in something like this is the thinking of the world, the consciousness congress of the world, debating ideas, battling them back and forth, trying to figure out how to get a handle on what is real and what is true and how to live. Now, of course, the church has been doing this far, far longer. The tweet from my friend Paul Anleitner. I've been in vocational Christian ministry for nearly 20 years, and here's what I can tell you. Whatever traditional religious denominations a person may claim to be affiliated with, these are the real religious denominations that are actually shaping America's lives. Disney, Fox News, Comcast, NBC Universal, Daily Wire Plus. I think Daily Wire Plus should be really happy to be in that list, because if I would put lists, it would be... I don't think they'd make the list. Sorry. And I know a lot of you out there, CNN, Warner Brothers Discovery, Apple, goes far beyond that. That's probably enough for now. So, yeah, there it is. Leave a comment.